Hi, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Bree. In today's video, we're going to be doing all the books I read in April. I read a total of 10 books this April, and well, I read probably, this is the second month where I've read the most. I think February I also read 10. It wasn't my best reading month in terms of ratings or how I felt about the books, so it was kind of a mixed bag. I had some I really liked and then some that were just okay or I didn't really like, and so we'll talk about all the things that I felt this month. So let's get into the video and start with my first book that I read. So the first book I read was Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. I read this on audiobook, but then I ended up seeing it on Pango Books for a really good price, and I really did enjoy this one, so I ended up picking up the little novella. It's a total of 130 pages-ish, and so it's very short. If you're looking for a short historical fantasy mystery, I think that this was a really good one. So basically we're following this woman who's a detective of sorts, and she sold her soul to save her brother like a long time ago, and she knows that her death date is coming up because basically she had a certain amount of time and then she's going to be brought to hell. So she knows that's coming up, and her partner doesn't really know that, and so she, at the beginning of the book, she's getting ready to tell her goodbye and stuff like that because it's a day away from this date, and she's doing this investigation because she does track down weird murders that have magical imprints on them, and it devolves into this whole crazy mystery, and it's really quick and fast-paced, and I really did enjoy it. I think it's one that I want to reread because I've realized two things. One is I felt like I wished at the time it was a little longer, and I still think that. I think there was so much to this that I could have really, really loved it if I had a little more time with the characters and the plot in general. So it wasn't a full 5 stars, but I did really enjoy it. But the other thing I've realized is that some of the plot points are missing for me because I did listen to it on audiobook. It was so quick that I felt like I didn't fully absorb the story because there was a lot of elements to this that were a little confusing just listening to it for me. So I do want to go back and reread it so that I can really understand fully what happened, because I did think it was a really fun, good ride, but it just was a little fast-paced with some of the plot elements. So it just wasn't a full 5 stars for me, but I've really been loving this author, so I'm really happy that I picked up The Midnight Bargain and now this, because it's two, one huge hit for me and then another pretty good one. So we're on a roll. So I guess next we'll talk about their other book, because I read a third book by them. So I read 2 this month, and this is their very first mystery series. It's a historical mystery series. It's called Witchmark, and this is a Edwardian inspired, and it is following our Dr. Miles Singer, and he is working at this hospital for war veterans. So it's veterans who've come home wounded in war. He's helping them, but the war is now finished, so they're having a lot more soldiers come home. So at the start of this book, he's having to decide which veterans that are already there to send home and which ones to keep, because they need to make room for the people who are going to be coming back. And it's a very hard decision, and he was also in the war himself, and so there's a lot to do with PTSD and what it means to live through a war and things like that, and see battle. So there's a lot of that. And then also the book kicks off where he's leaving work and this carriage pulls up and has a guy who's severely wounded, who they rush him in, and he has to help him, but he ends up dying. And as he's dying, he says that he calls him by his old name that no one's supposed to know, and he also has signs that something magical and bad happened to him. This is a world where there are magic users, but they are sanctioned to the rich side of society. So anyone who isn't part of that world, if they are found with magic, they are deemed to go insane, and so they're shipped off to these asylums. And so it's very secretive. People don't want to be known for using magic. They try to hide it at all costs. So this guy had magic, and so he also, Dr. Singer, has magic himself, and he is able to use it to see into the memories of this person and kind of realize that he has been murdered. So he wants to figure it out. While he's there, there's a guy who brought him in who witnesses him using magic, and so he's very concerned that he's going to be blackmailed by this man, and and this man actually ends up saying that he wants to work with him to find the killer. And so it's their story and how they're going to go on. There's romance in here. There's a lot of magic elements to this as well. So it's definitely like a fantasy mystery on the side. I feel like the fantasy and like political aspects took a lot more of the forefront than like the mystery side, but I did enjoy this book. I think it's probably a middle of the road book for me. Like I can see where Sea Book started and where all their really good ideas are first formulating in this series, but it wasn't my favorite one that I've read by them. If you're someone who enjoys like historical fantasy or historical for its like very accurate representation of history and things like that, then this really wouldn't be for you. This is like they said, Edwardian inspired. So it takes a lot of liberties, but I didn't mind that at all. But that's just something I think to note, because I know some historical readers really do like historical accuracy in this, and in their books it's just not as present in this. So I had a good-ish time. I think I liked the book, but it didn't blow me away like I was hoping to. But again, this is their first work, so I will still continue on with the series because it did leave off kind of on a cliffhanger, and I want to see where it goes. But it just wasn't my favorite by them, which makes sense because it's their debut book. So then we'll talk about the series that I've been kind of flying through so far since picking it up, and that's the Lady Darby mystery series. So this is Grave Matter, which is the third, and A Study in Death, which is the fourth. The very first book is The Anatomous Wife, and these are by Anna Lee Huber. So these are set in Scotland in like, this one's 1830, and this one's 1831. The series is about this woman who she was married to this man who was really not a good guy, and he did autopsies. He was an anatomist, and he made her draw what he was seeing for his like books that he was going to publish. And when it came out that he was making her do this, she was very much ostracized from society. It was like a huge scandal, and he is now dead, and she's moved back with her family, and no one really wants to talk to her because of what she did, even though she was forced to do this. People don't understand that. So she's kind of on her own, and in the first one, a person dies at their estate when they are hosting a party. She lives with her sister and her sister's husband, and a lot of people think she did it. So she ends up working with this guy who's a lord who also works as like an inquiry agent, basically. And they have to figure out who did it, and she's trying to clear her name. And I really enjoyed the first one. But this one has to do with, she's now with her brother at her brother's estate for the time being, and there is some like grave robbing happening, and they have to figure out why these bodies are being taken. And so this one is still murder mystery, but it definitely deals way more with like grave robbing at the forefront, so it kind of gives you a break from that like classic murder mystery. So this one is, I think they're in Edinburgh, and she does paintings for people, and so she's going to this one woman's house all the time to paint her portrait. And the book starts, and her husband is just not a great guy, and she ends up falling dead, and Kira believes that she was murdered, and so she's trying to prove that this woman was murdered. So I think the first one's still my favorite. I think I liked this one maybe a little bit more. The first one was like a high. I like really loved it, and I feel like these ones have kind of gone to like the like side of things. I have fun with them, and they're like a good time, but they're just not quite the Rexford and Sloane series that I love so much. I think it's the romance side of things. They get in more fights, I think, than they do in Rexford and Sloane, and I realize that I'm just like a soft romance girly, so I think that's what's holding me back from like fully loving these. But I am having a good time, and they're great to just pick up when I want something quick and light that I can fly through, and these are definitely that. So then let's talk about Grave Reservations by Sherry Priest. I read this recently, and this was so fun. I think this is like a really good book if you're looking for a summer beach read. I think this would be perfect. So this is following our main character, Lita, and she is kind of a psychic, but she doesn't really know how to use her gift really well. But she is a travel agent, and the book starts out when she's talking to this guy on the phone, and she's trying to convince him she would change his flight, and he is really upset with her that she would change his flight, and he's stuck in traffic. And so he would have missed his flight anyway. And so she's like going back and forth with him as he's upset that she didn't even tell him but changed his flight. And all she can tell him is she just had a bad feeling. She just like knew he shouldn't get on the flight. Well, as he's at the airport, he sees the plane he was supposed to be in catch fire. And a lot of people made it off, but he would have been on that plane and could have been seriously endangered. And then the next chapter, is him coming to her travel agent store, and he's actually a cop, and he wants her to help him solve an old murder. This was fun. It didn't give me quite like the Finlay Donovan vibes where it's like over the top ridiculous, but it still had that humor to it that was really fun. But there was also a serious part to this as well, because her fiance, he passed away in a strange way. Like they believe he was murdered, but no one's been able to figure it out. And so she's like has this weight on her from that experience. So she works with him, and she also kind of wants to figure out like through him like what happened to her fiance. And so yeah, she's learning to like use her psychic abilities, and she also does like go to this bar and she does practice on the people where she like takes a piece of their item and tries to like make a song play out of it for whatever reasons. And so she's been doing that. So there's a lot of like fun things to this as well. And it wasn't overall the most crazy mystery I've ever read, but I think the cozy vibes were there. It's a really good, like cozy, fun mystery, and it's a good one to start if you are looking for something that's just starting out, because there's only 2 books out in this series. So I definitely will be continuing the next one called Flight Risk. So I wouldn't recommend reading these if you're traveling on a plane, but if you're land based, maybe check it out. So then let's talk about a book I actually got 60-ish% of the way through. I got this far and I had to DNF it because I just couldn't do it anymore. And that is The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. I'm so sad that I had to DNF this book because it was one of the books that I thought was going to be 5 stars for me. And before I get into what it's about, let me preface by it's a me thing, less to do with this book. So this is a horror book that's about witches during kind of like Salem times. It's a puritanical society, and we're following our main character Emmanuel, whose mother went and like tried to kill the like priest essentially that runs the place. And this priest is kind of almost like a god to the society. Like he has full control over everything, and her mom ran off into the woods and was never seen again. And so she has been trying to prove to like this church that she's not sinful and things like that. And it also has to do with her like discovering witches and things like that, and being pulled towards like this darkness of these woods that no one's supposed to go into, that are supposed to have like dangerous witches in it. Well, I thought like that sounded so much for me. The reason I had to put this down was really that there is a lot about women's bodies and violence against women. Yeah, just a lot to do with like pregnancy, birth, abuse, trauma to women's bodies. And I just didn't realize, like, it was on me. I should have checked trigger warnings, but I didn't. And I really should have, because I just couldn't take it. I actually put it down because in this scene that I put it down, there was a birthing scene that which I just could not read. And I had to stop for my own mental health. So I stopped the book. If this seems like something that you can handle and read, it was very well written. It sucked you in. It had this like dark, creepy atmosphere and overall tension. It wasn't high action, but there was just this eeriness that I really like that comes with like gothic stories. I felt like that a lot, but just the content was too much. So I would still check it out if you like those things. Maybe it would be for you, but if you don't like those same trigger warnings as me, I would not recommend this one. I don't think I'll ever finish it just based on what the content was. So on a lighter note, I read 10,000 Stitches by Olivia Atwater. Love, love, love Half a Soul. And I really loved this one too. This one they're like companion books. So this one follows a housemaid who works for this rich family, and they are all kind of taken advantage of. They're not really well, what's the word? They're not appreciated in this house. At the beginning of this book, the main character, Effie, she sees like the son of this couple who comes in, and she immediately knows that she's in love with him. And that night there is a ball that they've been putting on, and she goes out into the courtyard, and there is a fairy there who agrees to help her. Like, she makes a bet with him that she can marry this guy in, I think it's 100 days, and then she has to do some tasks for him, and if she does, she gets to marry this guy and live her happily ever after, and if she doesn't, she has to go be a housemaid to this fairy forever. And it was very sweet. It was, I would say, not quite as sweet to me as Half a Soul. Like, there was something about Half a Soul that I just absolutely fell in love with, but this had the same kind of feelings. I just didn't quite fall in love with this couple quite as much, but still I had a really good time, and I would recommend this series to really anyone because they're just so soft and sweet and just like wholesome. They're just definitely a cozy fantasy, even though there are some like harder topics sometimes talked about. There's something that just like speaks to my soul in these. So I really liked Effie, our main character. I think that she was a fun perspective. She wasn't a pushover, but she also let a lot of things go. So she knew that, like, as a housemate, she couldn't speak her mind all the time. And so she would just let things happen to her. But, like, she also had this, like, willingness to, like, fight for herself outside of, like, her role as a housemaid. And so it talks a lot, too, about, like, privilege and being, you know, the lower class versus upper class and things like that. And falling in love with someone you barely know and things like that. I just really liked it. There was some crossover, so there is a character from the first book that you do get to see in this, so I like that there was some crossover, but I don't feel like you had to have read. Well, I do think you should probably read Half a Soul before you read this one because I do think there was a little bit of spoiler, but it's just fun. I like when books have those like nods to them. So this was definitely a win this month and something my soul needed very badly. Then I read Flower Heart by Catherine Bakewell. This is a cozy fantasy kind of Studio Ghibli vibes. It kind of reminds me of Howl's Moving Castle or like Kiki's Delivery Service, kind of. So we're following our main character, Clara, and she has this wild magic. Her mom was a witch who had gone bad, and she hasn't spoken to her in years. Her magic is untamable. Like, she just really can't control her magic. And so at the beginning of this book, the witches are going to come and they are threatening to take away her magic because they think that she could really hurt someone. And so they're giving her until a certain time to get her magic under control, or they will either bind it to her, which means like when she uses it, it's very painful, or they will just take it away altogether and then she can never have it back. And so her old best friend, who is now a high wizard, he accepts the challenge to like help her learn her magic in this time frame. There's also an added thing where she does accidentally harm her father, and so they are rushing against the clock to save him. This has cottagecore vibes. There's very much like about flowers and growing herbs for your like potions and things like that. So like the vibes were really good and really cozy, but I just didn't like the plot quite as much. I think it was just, there's just something slightly off about me loving the plot. I think the romance too in this was a little too on the nose for me. I think maybe like I wanted a little less like handed to me and a little more of like inferring things, I guess. I'm not really sure what the main issue is, but it was cozy, but it didn't blow me away. And I was really, really expecting to like love this, especially when you say Studio Ghibli vibes. Like, I do get that, but it didn't have quite the whimsy that I got from Studio Ghibli, like Howl's Moving Castle or things like that. There was not the same level of like kind of ridiculousness or whimsy, like I said, that you get from those books. So I think this was definitely like a middle of the road book for me. I didn't dislike it by any means, but it just wasn't my favorite cozy fantasy I've read. So we'll start off on my last bad book before we get to my last very good book, because I like to end on a more positive note. So this is Heart's Blood by Juliette Marillier. This is a standalone historical fantasy. I would say mainly fantasy, but there are nods historical. This is also like a Beauty and the Beast retelling, which I didn't know that going in. I've been wanting to pick up a Juliette Marillier, and this was the one I found at Half Price Books, and since it was a standalone, I thought I would try it first. So we're following at the beginning of this book this woman who is running away from her home for a reason we don't really know. She ends up at this town where she is going to stay, and she ends up getting a job at this castle on the hill, and a lot of the townsfolk tell her not to go there because there are things in this woods, like spirits that could kill you or very much hurt you. And she does it anyway because she is more scared of what's coming after her than these spirits. And so she goes to this place where she's helping the lord of the land take notes because she knows how to write. So she's like going through his books and trying to write stuff down for him and translate, because most of the stuff's in Latin, but he only speaks Celtic. So this is also where the history part comes in. This is reminiscent of like Irish folk tales and stuff. So it's like, it doesn't ever give you a time period, but it's definitely like old Ireland, old Celtic feelings. It's at a time where like the roots of Irish like civilization are trying to hold on while also being like kind of taken over by England. And so it's like that kind of time period. There's magic in this as well. And like I said, it's Beauty and the Beast retelling where she is kind of racing against the clock to find a cure for this curse that's been put on this town before it's too late. And there were just things I did not love about this book. Basically, the way he is a beast is that he had a palsy, like he had palsy when he was younger, and so now his limbs don't, on one side, don't really work the same. And so there's a lot of ableist stuff in this book that I just didn't like. There was very much like a mentality of like, if she just shows him that he isn't like as incapable as he thinks, then he's just gonna be able to like overcome and do the thing. While I think it's like good to, you know, not believe yourself incapable of things, there are, you know, like limitations to things. Like you can't force someone to do something that's just like they're not able to do. Ableism. And so instead of like accommodating certain things, while there was some of that, there was a lot of just like, if you just hope and you just practice, like you'll overcome this. And I really, really didn't like that. But also the like mystery itself, it dragged on. It was very slow. And I just didn't enjoy it. The things I did enjoy were the writing. It's very atmospheric. It's definitely has to do with like forests and Ireland, and like the atmosphere was so good. I could like stay in this world for a while, but just the plot was too slow. I didn't love the main character and just getting her point of view. The like twists in the book I saw coming from like a mile away. So I really didn't like this. I think this is probably the worst book I've read this year, which is sad because like I don't think it did anything that I was like screaming at, like super mad about, but I just didn't appreciate a lot of this stuff in here. And I have another book, The Daughter of the Forest, to try, which is a different series that I've heard really good things about. So I'm going to give this author another shot. And maybe this was just a book that didn't realize the error of its ways. But yeah, it just wasn't for me. And I definitely will be taking this off my shelves very soon. Then I read a book that I'm loving and I'm going to continue. And that is All Systems Red. It's the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. It's the first one. Oh my gosh, I am not a sci-fi person. I really haven't found my niche in sci-fi. But I've read A Psalm for the Wild Boat by Becky Chambers, and now I've read this, and I've maybe read like one or two other sci-fis in my life. So I'm not well versed. But oh my gosh, did I love this. It was so fun. People say it's like funny and just kind of ridiculous, and I would agree. I didn't really know what to expect going in, but I thought a novella is an easy place to start with sci-fi to just see if it's for me. And it was a great place to start because Murderbot is funny. They just want to watch their soaps and they don't want to do a lot, but they have to protect these humans on this ship. Then some stuff starts going very wrong and they're trying to figure out what's going on. I love being in the head of Murderbot, and the mystery itself was like fast and fun, and I think it was written in a way where you couldn't really predict what was going to happen, and that made it fun for me as well because you're just kind of like on the ride with Murderbot as they're trying to figure out what the heck is going on. And yeah, there's just something about the writing that is very readable to me. And although I do wish it could have been longer because I just wanted to be with Murderbot for longer, I have picked up the next one in the series, so really I'm just going to be right back to it. So I'll be back reading them back to back, so it doesn't need to be longer because I'm just going to keep on going. And they're all going to be, I think, little like mysteries along the way, so very fun. If you're looking for a sci-fi to just try that's kind of like lighter sci-fi, I would maybe try this because while there is like a lot of technical things going on and they're explaining things, it didn't really go over my head too much. It made it like more accessible. So I feel like this was like the best place for me to really start in sci-fi, especially technology-based sci-fi. It was just very fun and I'd recommend it. So these are all the books I read in the month of April. It was an okay reading month, but I'm glad I found some that I really enjoyed. I hope you had a good reading month. If you want to leave me any recommendations down below or just talk about the books you read, I always love hearing from you. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.